Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go over 2.6 notes. There again, make sure you're taking notes on each lecture video when you are a remote learner. Here's the idea or the layout for the week. We're going to do, it's being Tuesday 2.6. You do have your Patriot Act assignment that you need to go ahead and try to complete. Tomorrow being all remote and 2.7 notes being relatively short. We're going to go ahead and cover 2.7 and 2.8. So you may feel just a little bit overloaded, but there again, 2.7, 2.8, we're going to go ahead and get that out of the way. And so on Thursday, you're going to come in here and you're going to go ahead and take the open notes test for Unit 2. That way we get that out of the way. And then on Friday, we are going to watch a documentary being 9/11. There will be guided questions to that you will have to answer. So there again, whether you're in class or you're remote, you will be required to watch that and then there again fill those questions in out of respect, of course, for that day. And then when we come back in here on Monday, we'll be ready to start Unit 3. So we're just going to compile 2.7, 2.8. So I'm just telling you right up front that Wednesday is going to feel like a little bit of an overloaded day. It's not anything that you can't get done. So just throwing that out there. That will be the expectation and the requirement for 2.7, 2.8 tomorrow being all remote. We're going to put those together, Thursday test, and then Friday, there again, we'll watch that documentary. And that's it other than that. So it's a pretty low-key week, not a whole lot going on. All right, so you see the I can statement over to your far left. The I can reads, explain how the federal government can use power to strengthen national security. We're also going to talk about individual freedoms versus protect the country through understanding the Patriot and Freedom Acts. All right, so if you're remote, there again, we sort of had a little bit of discussion in class as far as protect the country versus individual freedoms. The assignment sort of lets you, in your own words, put are you for the increase of national security at the expense of individual liberties? And so we'll try to explain this in our notes. There again, if you feel like that you need more detail as far as the Patriot Act as we progress on, there again, you can use a separate search engine and find that out. But anyway, you do have an assignment for this. Matter of fact, it's one of only 3 assignments for this week. So it is a pretty short week. Make sure you write the I can statement in 2.6. Make sure that you understand, there again, the working capacity of the Patriot Act that we'll try to go into great detail with as far as these notes. These notes are not overly long. We want to start out real quick by just the government powers. And just to remind you that delegated powers are powers that belong to Congress. For example, the declaration of war and the coining of money. They are expressly mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, so we refer to them as either delegated or we refer to them at times as expressed powers. Please remember, powers that belong to U.S. Congress. Now, the powers that are not specifically mentioned to Congress but doesn't deny the states are reserved powers. Please remember the 10th Amendment that the Constitution reserves those powers for the state, henceforth reserved powers. Please remember that some of the examples of reserved powers could be such as establishing schools. It's not the role of the federal government to establish school districts. That's the state. It's not the federal government's role to pass truancy laws to make sure that kids come to school. That's the state. It's not the federal government's role to establish a curriculum for teachers to teach in their classrooms and for students to be to learn and then be standardized tested on. All right, that's the state that does that. All right, police organizations are the same way. Reserved powers, powers that belong to the state. Concurring powers or concurrent are powers that are shared by both federal and state governments. Examples we've talked about in here is collecting taxes. Both governments have to have taxes or tax dollars in order to be able to efficiently operate, establishing a court and borrowing money. So there again, this probably is a bit familiar. So we move on. Now, how do we apply the Bill of Rights to the state? Federal and state executive branches can reduce punishment. All right, second bulleted point says that federal and state executive leaders can initiate a pardon. All right, it is release from punishment. Let me give you some notable pardons in American history from a presidential perspective. Let's go into the 1970s. Richard Nixon was caught up in the Watergate scandal, in which he had several of his Republican affiliates tap into Democrat headquarters. Of course, there's tapes that prove that, you know, this was an intent to break into the headquarters, and so Richard Nixon, his head is basically on the chop block. He don't want to go down in American history as the first president to be, I guess you would say, dismissed from the impeachment charge, so he resigns from office. Gerald Ford, vice president under Nixon, takes over the helm as far as president of the United States, and when he becomes president, he will provide a presidential pardon, basically removing all charges against Richard Nixon. That's kind of a working capacity of how, there again, the pardons can operate. And there, of course, you can do it on a state scale with the governor's approval. Another presidential pardon would be Jimmy Carter, and how that he pardoned the protesters, the draft dodgers during the Vietnam War. He provides presidential pardon or release as far as punishment. Trump just the other day provided a pardon for an African American lady. I think she spoke at the Republican National Convention. There again, provided pardon for her. She was serving a pretty lengthy sentence, and so he provided that release there. So very important that you're able to see how that these executive roles can step in and release from punishment. The third bulleted point, very important we talk about it just for a moment. Many say that it is the cornerstone of due process. Of course, due process is fair and equal treatment in a court of law. Well, what is the cornerstone of that? It's referred to as habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is the order to produce an arrested person before a judge. So in other words, if a person is apprehended, if a person is accused, if a person is arrested, that individual has the right to stand before a judge. A judge then will read off as to the reasoning why that this person has been placed under arrest. And so the whole purpose behind that is the insurance that if a prisoner can be released from unlawful imprisonment due to lacking sufficient causes or even evidence. Very important. There again, this protects you and I from what you might say unreasonable accusation. You suspend habeas corpus, it's much easier then to take person from point A to point B, and what I mean by that is make the arrest and then boom, into jail. But there again, there are unlawful arrests and accusations. What protects the person? Habeas corpus. Case in point, Abraham Lincoln suspends habeas corpus during the American Civil War. Journalists would often up north write negative things about him. He didn't like that, so there again, with the suspension of habeas corpus, he makes an arrest for those people and puts them into jail. Even senators, one in particular by the name of Clement Vallandigham, would stand on a Senate floor and badmouth Abraham Lincoln. Guess where he goes? He goes to jail. Under normal circumstances, under the habeas corpus, they would have probably have been released, but nevertheless, at a time during insurrection or rebellion in the United States, the Constitution does say that habeas corpus can be suspended, and that in which the case Abraham Lincoln done. So a lot of people cry foul to Lincoln in regards to that. And was he unconstitutional? Absolutely, he was unconstitutional, because if you study the Constitution, only U.S. Congress has the ability to suspend habeas corpus. Under the American Civil War, the executive branch or executive leader in Abraham Lincoln doesn't so. The action itself is not unconstitutional, because there again you can do it under insurrection or rebellion, but it's not the president who does it, it's Congress. And so yes, Abraham Lincoln was unconstitutional. But anyhow, those are just some of the working functions of what can happen when there is a suspension of habeas corpus. And so that's why people say that it is the cornerstone of due process. There again, it protects you and me from unreasonable accusations brought against us. And if there's not enough evidence proving as to why we should be sentenced to jail, then we should be set free. And so there again, it does, there again, protect the prisoner from unlawful imprisonment, from unreasonable accusations. Very important when it comes to the idea of due process. Make sure that you write down habeas corpus. There's some test questions with that. All right, let's talk about the USA Patriot Act just for a few minutes. This was enacted and signed into law 45 days after the terrorist attacks of New York City and following September 11, 2001. Very form-fitting that we're going over this, of course, the week of 9/11. And so one of the goals of the Patriot Act, or primary goals, it's a controversial law. You need to know that. All right, it's goals to strengthen domestic security, broaden the powers of law enforcement agencies with regards to identifying and stopping terrorists. This Patriot Act was a controversial piece, passed by a wide majority of Congress and signed by President George W. Bush in October of 2001. It was designed to strengthen national security following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Here's what happens. The legislation relaxes federal surveillance laws, granting authorities broad leeway to gather information on United States citizens and resident foreigners. It also expands the government's prosecutorial powers against suspected terrorists and their associates. The complex act, which contains some 168 sections, allows the nation's intelligence and law enforcement agencies to, among other things, monitor email and financial transactions without securing a subpoena, use wiretapping without a court order, and require internet services to hand over usage data on customers. Now, by listening to that, you're probably thinking, man, this is really tapping into my personal freedoms and personal property and my privacy. Yes, it does to a degree. So therefore, a lot of people say that this really undermines civil liberty, and that is the ongoing debate. All right, individual freedoms, are they more important than protecting the country? And so that's the gist of the matter. One of the most controversial sections of the Patriot Act is the so-called library provision, which allows government officials to secretly subpoena books, records, papers, documents, and other items from businesses, hospitals, and other organizations. The critics behind all of the Patriot Act fear that the government could use the provision to snoop into the reading habits of innocent Americans. The reaction to the provision was so strong that according to the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, 5 states, 375 communities, and 43 states have passed the Anti-Patriot Act resolution by spring of 2005. Many legislatures and security experts hail the Patriot Act provisions as necessary in combating terrorism and securing the homeland. Others immediately saw the legislation as a serious infringement of civil rights. Supporters pointed to the hundreds of charges brought against suspected terrorists, as well as hundreds of convictions as a result of the Patriot Act. But critics, including legislatures, the ACLU, some conservative groups, and many citizens, call the act unconstitutional and unpatriotic. A top ACLU representative said, "Cooler heads can now see that the Patriot Act went too far, too fast, and that it must be brought back in line with the Constitution." So there again, there is a lot of differences of opinion when it comes to the Patriot Act. As the debate continued over the constitutionality of the Patriot Act, some provisions were set to expire in the end of 2005. So there again, that is sort of the working capacities of the Patriot Act. And you think about it, are you okay with a lot of your civil liberties basically being halted, suspended, or frozen under situations of terrorism? There again, a lot of people are not down with that. A lot of people don't think that liberty nor security should ever be in question, that a person not to be able to have both. So make sure at the conclusion of these notes that you watch just the ongoing debate in which you see in September, I think 2011 maybe, or 12, whenever that debate occurred between Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich. It's about 4 minutes in which they debate one another pertaining to the Patriot Act. That's very good as far as being able to see how politicians view the Patriot Act. So before you start that assignment, watch just that 4-minute segment of video. That helps you out a lot there again to help develop your stance on it. But anyway, what you do need to know is that the USA Patriot Act will eventually reach an expiration. June 2015 was the conclusion of the Patriot Act. So currently at that time, some 5 years ago, the federal government was restricted at stopping terrorism. We didn't have anything in play that would continue to strengthen law enforcement. So what did they do? They come up with what now is referred to as the Freedom Act. This was signed into law the summer of 15, which of course extends the Patriot Act. Now what you need to know is that it gives the green light to a lot of the things that the Patriot Act enforced, but then it does put a screeching halt on some things as well. Some things that are in continuance. The third bulleted point, the National Security Agency still has the ability to direct federal agencies. There still is the ability to collect data through interception, a hop system, meaning there again that they can hop from phone to phone. If they believe a suspected terrorist, of course, is using the phone, they can go to those phones and hop those systems. A lot of people say that that's not necessary, that's too much, that they can tap in to phone records and intercept phone calls on a consistent basis when, there again, the Patriot Act is implemented. So there again, there's still the continual tapping into America's personal record. So those things haven't changed as we transition from the Patriot to the Freedom Act. All right, please know that. There again, the federal government can still allow the FISA courts to use secret warrants. Very important that you know that. Meaning that they don't necessarily have to show a search warrant because the FISA courts have already established what is referred to as a secret warrant, meaning that they can just go in and they can, there again, use the word secret warrant or the term or the action, you might say, to be able to gain the intelligence that they need. The Lone Wolf Amendment is still extended. There again, Lone Wolf is a terrorist who is acting out solely. Eric Rudolph would be a good example of a lone wolf terrorist. Timothy McVeigh would be a good example of a lone wolf terrorist. Really no affiliation with any coalition or outside country, just acting solely as far as, their own personal intentions. A lot of people really question the Patriot Act because the word terrorist is kind of vaguely used, and they believe that it gives the government too much power to deem anybody a terrorist if need be. So there again, it kind of is all in the eye of the beholder. But you do need to know that those two things are still in continuance as we transition from Patriot to now currently the Freedom Act. What you do need to know as far as coming to a stop is that the federal government doesn't collect data as far as phone data anymore. The private phone companies hold the data, and then the government must retrieve it with a search warrant. Whereas before, the federal government the data would go directly to them if need be. The HOP system would be limited to 2. Whereas in past it was 3. I know that phrase there might be a little confusing, but just please remember that the HOP system is now limited to 2 phones. So they really limit that ability to transfer from one phone to the other. All right, the FISA court has to provide information on rulings and rationale. They have to be able to verbally commit to as to why that they're doing what they're doing. They have to have documentation. There again, it holds them accountable and it sort of reduces the possibility of abuse, especially when you hold those courts accountable for that. So they have to be able to provide reasonable ruling and rationale as to why they are doing what they are doing. The hopes is that this would eliminate the possibility of the violation of civil liberties. Now, the big question is at the very bottom that you see here, does this violate the Fourth Amendment? And so there again, as the debate continues over the constitutionality of the Patriot Act, some provisions were set there again to expire, and of course they did in 15, but it is an ongoing question. Does this violate the Fourth Amendment? And you'll see in that video, and desperately need to watch that, Ron Paul versus Newt Gingrich when it comes to the Patriot Act. So how do you see it? Do you think that the Patriot Act is the necessary good and in which it protects the country, or do you think that under no circumstances individual freedoms should be undermined or frozen? So there again, which stance do you take? I'll be able to see that stance as far as when you fill out that writing prompt in which Benjamin Franklin says a person that gives up liberties for protection deserves neither. So he obviously was of the idea that none of those things should be given up, as Ron Paul that you'll see in the video. So there you have it with 2.6 notes. How do you perceive the Patriot Act? There again, put that in your own words in the writing prompt. All right, don't forget, tomorrow's all remote, 2.7, 2.8. You're going to fill out a political spectrum. You're going to go on a website tomorrow and do I side with to see where you would shake up as far as voting for based off the different topics, and then be ready for that test on Thursday. And then on Friday, we will watch there again that 9/11 documentary. Have a great day.